Take Possession is the title of this morning's study. It's interesting, the book of Joshua and the conquest is, well, we typically think of conquest in a context of military campaigns. Think about the great military campaigns that we have throughout even our history as a nation. In the Great War, in the Second World War. You think back also to some of the great conquerors of the past, some good, some not. And in order to conquer a land and people, there needs to be some element of planning and strategy. Military planning, military strategy, battle plans is a term we're familiar with. It is interesting as we begin this book that in what would otherwise be a traditionally militaristic endeavor, we don't really find much of that language to this point. And it really is taking more of a spiritual plan and a spiritual formation than one that is directly relating to any military operation. Victor Hamilton, in his handbook on the historical books, says this: in a book whose first half is devoted to a narration of matters heavily militaristic, it's interesting that Yahweh's commissioning of Joshua is so decidedly unmilitaristic. Not a word about military strategy. The bulk of the second half of Yahweh's message to Joshua is always to keep before him the Torah of Moses and walk in its teachings. And we looked at last week how that would really be the foundation for everything that Joshua and Israel would go and do as they conquered the land. And here in verses 10 down through 18, we have the instruction now of Moses to his leaders and to the people to actually go and take possession of the land. So God commanded Joshua, and now Joshua is going to command the people. Command comes from God to Joshua, to the people, to go and take possession of the land. Let's read beginning in verse 10. Excuse me. It says, and Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan, to go in, to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. And to the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you. And they also take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it, the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. And they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command him, shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. When I first was looking at this chapter, I almost thought about doing it in one teaching, but if I'm being candid, I came to the second half, I'm like, what am I going to say, about that I haven't already said last week? But as I studied this passage, there's just some really, just choice little truths in here that so apply to us in our season as a church, but also in varying seasons of life. And the first we find in verses 10 and 11 as Joshua commands preparation for possession. Do you notice the very first thing that we see Joshua doing is commanding? After God has come and told him it's now his turn to lead the people into Israel, into the land. It's the very first thing that we see Joshua doing. Based off of what we've heard God tell Joshua to this point, we can infer that this would not be his typical disposition to command. He's been an assistant for 40 years to Moses. And now God has commanded him to lead the people into the land, to be strong and courageous 3 times. He said that. I'm going to be with you. And now in verse 10, the very first thing we see Joshua do or say is Joshua commanded. Joshua commanded. And I think this speaks to us of a couple of things. And I think there's 3 things in this section for us to consider. But as it relates to Joshua commanding the people, is that Joshua stepped into his work. Right? Paul says, God has created works for us to walk in beforehand. Even before we were created anew in Jesus, God has created works for us to walk in. We walk in them by faith and obedience. This work that God had given Joshua to walk in, he stepped into it by faith and obedience. So just in these first 3 words here in this verse, and Joshua commanded, he is exhibiting obedience from a heart of faith. He says, okay, I don't really see how all this is going to happen perhaps, but I know that we've got to get ready to cross the Jordan, so get things in order is what he's going to tell the people. I think it's an important principle for us from Joshua here, is that when God calls us to take steps of faith, however big or small, okay? Come pastor a church, replant a church, serve in the children's ministry, practically serve somebody that you feel impressed to so that you have an opportunity to share the gospel with them. Whether to serve on the worship team or to go on a mission trip. There's all these types of things that God calls us to do. And we take steps of faith. Share the gospel. Serve in this way. Do this. Go there. Well, we step in obedience, but the willingness to step in obedience comes from a motive and a heart of faith. Believing that God's promises are real and true and valid for us. Right? Did not God promise Joshua that he would be with him? That he would lead him? That he would really give him everything that he needed? Well, this Joshua commanding the people is saying, all right, I'm trusting that these people are going to listen to what I had to say. These people are going to listen to me as though I am Moses to them. As though I am you to them, like Moses was to them. And this is such an important thing for us to remember, is that we take steps of faith in obedience to and in confidence of God's commands and promises. Knowing that, we really probably don't have what it takes. Not really probably. We don't have what it takes to do it. But steps of faith are a beautiful opportunity for us to display obedience and a heart of faith to the Lord and to example what it means to actually go forth in courage, not knowing how this is going to turn out or feeling inadequate for it, only to see God show up and do something only he can do. You don't see a back and forth here with Joshua. Lord said, do this, Joshua commanded. Parents, have you ever given instruction to your children? Maybe more like command to your children? And they don't do it? Any number of statements that we could say in that moment. I've got ones that my parents used in that moment. One that I use is, hello? Did you hear me? Oh, I'm the only one that's dealt with that. Okay, all right, great. Yeah, it happens, and we see that, and sometimes in some of those conversations, we'll say, do this, or the classic, like, kid jumping to their parents in the pool or something like that, and fear or things keep them from obeying, or complacency, all sorts of things, just wanting to do whatever they want to do. But as parents, we expect timely obedience, don't we? I mean, there's this saying, right, that partial obedience or delayed obedience is no obedience at all. It's true. With God, with our parents during those times, and as parents, but we will demonstrate our faith to God. We'll demonstrate our faith in His promises by our obedience to His commands. So we should be obedient in the same way that Joshua was, even though we don't see how it's all going to pan out. I could tell you, when we came down here, I had no idea how this was going to pan out. Still don't. I'm still walking by faith. You just don't know how things are going to pan out. I can think about other mission trips and things that we've been on, or serving in certain ministries. You just don't know how it's going to pan out, or sharing the gospel with somebody. It's like, are they going to punch me in the teeth or what? What's going to happen when I step out and do this? And the best thing for us to do is just to walk in God's will in that moment. That, like, there's no better place to be, no better frame of mind to operate from than to do so in obedience. Second thing is this, from this passage. Preparations are necessary for advances, spiritual or otherwise. I mean, think of D-Day and the amount of years even that went into planning that type of an invasion. That was a huge undertaking. And here, Israel is about to take the land that God had promised to them, but still there were preparations, even though they weren't overtly military plans. They were still plans, and Joshua tells his people and the leaders, the elders, to plan. It says this in verse 10, we hear who it is, commanded the officers of the people. Varying opinions on who these are. Are these, similar to the 70 elders? Are these the elders? Is it primarily administrative? Is there some military aspect to it? Seems that these were probably the elders that were selected to help administrate the people, but does it much matter? It doesn't affect the way that we understand it. They're leaders of the people. He gives them instructions. Verse 11, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions. For within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go and take possession of the land. And their provisions are the things that they need for life. Food, belongings. Again, it's not weapons or anything like that. It's like pack up the camp. We are about to go. And that would also include the tabernacle, right? Because that was a portable thing. And so they would be preparing that because, as we'll see, the Ark of the Covenant was going to stand in the river with the Levites who were holding it as the people went over, essentially leading the people over. But one thing I do want to mention here is this phrase of 3 days, and perhaps depending on your translation, in the ESV it says within 3 days. It seems that this is more of a figure of speech, because if you look at the chronology of it, it's actually going to be beyond 3 days when they cross the Jordan. And so this causes some question of is the Bible wrong here or whatever? It does seem that this is a figure of speech that just speaks of a period of time over a period of a few days. And so it'd be similar to us saying in several days. We'll go, well, okay, well, several days could be 3 or it could be 13. I mean, who knows? So this is the kind of aspect. So we're going to cross over. And he says, prepare your provisions. Because we're going to go take possession. But preparation precedes possession. God will use days of preparation in our lives for the important works and seasons. He's good to us like that. He doesn't throw us to the wolves without developing within us the necessary character, trust, and obedience to actually walk out what he's calling us to do. I'm grateful for that because I need preparation for the things that God calls me to do. We need preparation for the things that he calls us to do. For Moses, how many years did he spend in the desert after he fled Egypt? 40 years, wasn't it? He spent 40 years. And then God used him to lead the people of Israel out. How many years has Israel been in the wilderness before they're going to conquer the land? And what was the purpose of the wilderness wanderings? It was so that they'd be ready to conquer, so that they would have faith to conquer, wasn't it, this new generation? What about David? He spent a lot of years in the sheep and among them and in the king's court under duress. And Paul even, he spent 3 years in Arabia and a number of other years before he went on his missionary journeys. And sometimes we can think that the work is more important necessarily than preparation for the work. We need to realize that God prepares his people for what he calls them to do. And sometimes we may be like, itching and rearing to go. But we must not soon glance over that there was preparation to be made. And we need preparation in our lives. Before we go into, think about when Jesus sent the disciples out. And they could not, there was one case where they could not cast out a demon. And why was it, Jesus said? Why did he say they weren't able to do that? He says, this kind only comes out by prayer and fasting. He wasn't telling them to throw out their bread and not drink anything while they're trying to cast the demon out. He's saying a regular pattern of preparing your heart and life and bodies for ministry will prepare you to be an effective and available vessel for the power of God to work through. And this is what seasons of preparation do for us. The Lord cleanses us, shapes us, he purifies us. In fact, before Jesus began his public ministry, where did the Spirit lead him? Into the wilderness. Led him even to be tempted. And I realize he's the Son of God, but this was an example to us that there's seasons of preparation for what God has for us. And the third consideration from these verses is this. Joshua could not complete the work himself. He realized that he needed to empower others to make preparation and to actually conquer the land. So he commanded the officers, and they went and they did so. And the primary way that he did this was principally by the term delegation, right? The term I'm sure we're all familiar with. And an effective work will include a good leader and faithful fellow workers. Think about Acts chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. Of course, this is a passage that I've mentioned a lot of late, but again, with the distribution of the food, it says, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty, that is, to give out the daily provisions. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and the ministry of the word. And it goes on to say in Acts chapter 6 how they did that. And everyone was pleased and satisfied. See, the apostles, they had their work to do, to lead and to teach and pray. And then these 7 men full of the Spirit had their work of ministering to the people. And then the people had the responsibility of walking within the bounds and the systems that God, through their leaders, had established. But just think, Acts chapter 6, all the missionary journeys of Paul, not one that he really went on by himself, even the one where he was making his way to Rome. And there were still people along with him, Luke being one. Think about all the churches that he established. Elders, deacons, leaders that he involved, and then he dispatched to these other churches to encourage them and to report. An effective work will include the work of others, not the leader alone. And Joshua would lead, example, and empower others to do the work. And this pattern we have, of course, in Ephesians chapter 4. This is how God has set up the church. You can also read 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where each member of the body of Christ has a function and a role, Christ being the head and the supreme leader of the church. And that the leaders of the church, evangelists, pastors, shepherds, and teachers, prophets, God has given those giftings to the church in order to equip the church. What does it say in verse 11 of Ephesians 4? For the what? Sitting in the pews. No. For the work of ministry. So this is the key thing. And, this is why I and we here at Calvary just place such an emphasis on. No, like we're actually, it's on all of us to serve. It's on all of us to contribute by the works and however God has gifted and led and invited us to serve, to actually see to it that we're being responsible with what God has entrusted us and to walk faithfully in those things. Beautiful thing when delegation and effective leadership and all of these things and God's power mix together. And the thing to remember about this as we move on into the next section here is that Joshua may have been the sole commander of Israel, but he was not the singular focus nor the sole figure in Israel's conquest. It involved all the people, involved the Levites, involved the people doing their part, involved the elders, and so forth. Verses 12 to 15, we have an interesting section here where Joshua commands the tribes that had settled east of the Jordan already to keep their word. He says, remember to keep your word. So, and to the Reubenites, verse 12, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest, and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan, but all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them. And what is the duration that this is? All right, so the men of valor, they are to go over and really kind of be the spear tip of the conquering forces. For how long? Well, verse 15, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers, as he has to you. And they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving to them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it. The land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. Of course, that's a reference to the east, land east of the Jordan. This was an allotment of land, really was a concession of Moses to those who, of those tribes, were like, well, we kind of actually like where we're at. Can we just stay here? And it was a concession of Moses to do that. But there was a condition that the Lord and Moses had set for them, and you can read about this in Numbers 32, especially verses 16 to 32. So Numbers 32, that yes, you can settle here, but when it comes time for the whole land to cross over, your men of valor need to actually go with everybody else, because you're not going to sit here and enjoy your land while your brothers and sisters are out there fighting for, in many cases, their lives, conquering people out of the land. You're going to send your men of war, and they're going to be at the tip of the spear as we conquer. And so this is just a reminder to this tribe, you need to keep your word. Because you said then that you would do so. You said then that you would follow through. Keep your promise. And once the other tribes have claimed their land, you can return. See, the settled tribes had a responsibility to help those who still needed to conquer their land of possession and be settled. And we find a New Testament principle similar, and that we as brothers and sisters of one another have a responsibility to support and bear the load of one another in others' times of need, and not watch from across the Jordan, as it were, in our settled states. One of the passages that we just recently studied in 1 Thessalonians really kind of touches on this point. And I want to read I have it marked here, but I don't have it written down actually word for word in my notes. But it's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, which says this, "And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone." But again, just that principle, admonish the idle. Okay, well who's going to be admonishing the idle? Those who aren't. Okay? Well, who's going to be encouraging the faint-hearted? Well, those who aren't faint-hearted. They're going to be encouraging them. Okay, well, who's going to be helping the weak? Not the weak, the strong. And so we have this principle also reflected in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, which I'm sure is probably one of the passages that first comes to our mind with this, is bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. But just a couple of verses prior, at the end of chapter 5 in Galatians, verse 13, he says, "You are called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." Don't you find it interesting that, and it's fine to take that verse and apply it to, say, individual aspects of our lives, not to give opportunity for the flesh in our daily living. But don't you find that interesting that verse and that command, don't use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, is in the context of serving our weaker brothers and sisters in their time of need, whether it's a spiritual need or a material need or some other need that may arise, a need to help accomplish a task, a need to set out on a ministry venture, on and on and on. How often are we called in the New Testament to look out for our brothers and sisters and to bear their burdens? Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 12, verses 26 and 27, If one member suffers, we all suffer together. If one member is honored, we all rejoice together. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. Collectively, we are one body, but individually, we are members connected together of that one body. And so we need to look out for each other. And we need to be willing to follow through on these commands to actually care for the needs. And I love how Paul says it in Philippians 2:4. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. We need to do that. We need to do that. And for the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, particularly it would manifest in this way, by following through with what they said they would do. By following through with what they said they would do. And this is not a correction of any particular thing. I think as believers, we have grown accustomed to a little too much grace in some ways. God's grace abounds. And so I don't want to diminish that. But at the same time, there is an expectation in Scripture that we will actually follow through with what we've committed to. And so just remember this as we serve and as we commit to engage in the ministry that God has entrusted to us here as a church, that to the best of our ability, and saying that we are going to commit ourselves to this ministry or this aspect of service in the church or this aspect of outreach, and the things that have been outlined for us to do, we need to keep our word, in essence, by following through and by doing it to the utmost of our ability. We need to follow through. And I think the exception should be that, say, when we have a commitment or when we've said, and listen, things come up. So it's not like, say if it's like a serving opportunity or a ministry opportunity. Well, there's always emergencies and there's always very important things that come up. But I would say this because, and I say this from experience. I don't say this from, like I'm preaching at you. I felt this before. I've committed to things, to maybe teach at something or to go and do a ministry with another brother or something like that. And the day rolls around, I'm like, I wish I would have said no. I really wish I would have said no. But I have a choice in that moment. Am I going to, and sometimes I might have a really good reason to say no. Like, man, I'm behind on so many other things. But so often in those moments, God just convicts me and says, well, you said yes. You said yes. So do it. And I'm sure that for those men of valor, their minds were probably concerned about being at home. I mean, these would have been the best people at war. I mean, already Israel's not a very strong military nation, but these were the best fighters. And they're going to leave their wives, their children in this land. And they're going to go fight. There have been a lot of good reasons for these guys to say, I think it's a little too risky. It'd be a little too inconvenient for me to actually go and do this. And so I just say we need to keep our word, whether it's a word that we give to God. Read Ecclesiastes chapter 5 on that. Better just not to vow than to vow something to the Lord and not follow through. But as James says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And in this way we will be like Jesus. Verses 16 to 18. The people commit to follow Joshua. Boy, this had to be probably a really encouraging moment for Joshua, right? Verse 16, and they answered Joshua, all that you've commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. So the people commit to follow Joshua, which in essence is a commitment for them to follow God, isn't it? And we're going to follow you because we are trusting that you're hearing from God and that you are now his mouthpiece to us. And now he's guiding us through you. I'm sure this had to be an encouragement to Joshua. For them to be effective, the people needed to be united. They needed to be united in submission to the leader that God had given them and to the task at hand. Effective spiritual work needs these three things, which we've seen over the last study, and two of them here today: God's power, godly leaders, and committed followers. This is a recipe for effective spiritual advance. We see this time and again throughout aspects of biblical history. Kind of reminds me during my time in the fire academy. I did volunteer firefighting for a number of years, and I was going through the academy, and one of the very basic things that we were taught is that really, and there's a number of ways that there's other 3 or 5 elements that involve fire for fire to actually happen. But the 3 things that mix for fire: there needs to be a fuel source, oxygen, and ignition. Those 3 things. And if one of those is missing, you're not going to have fire. And ignition, of course, it's a certain temperature that will ignite the fuel when mixed with the oxygen. When one of those things are missing, there may be some smoke, there may be some heat, but there's not actually combustion. There's not actually fire. And I think it's similar. Sure, the illustration breaks down in some way. But if God's power, godly leaders, or committed followers, any of those are missing, there might be some heat, there might be some smoke, but there's not going to be fire. And these 3 things are equally necessary for effective church ministry today. And as it relates to this section of verses, it focuses on the commitment of the people to actually engage and support and follow those Joshua, but the leaders that God has given in the vision. And I can't help but notice, and yes, I'm sure it was encouraging to Joshua, but I kind of want, you ever have a moment like this? Like, I kind of want to know what Joshua was thinking. Because he had just been through 40 years of wilderness after the generation prior had said the same exact thing at Sinai to Moses. All that you've commanded us, we will do. And Joshua, I'm sure, yes, is a leader of integrity. But you just got to wonder at their statement. And I believe that Joshua took them at their word. I don't think he was cynical. Just got to wonder if that thought was in the back of his mind. And of course, we'll go on through the book of Joshua, and they were not perfect. They did not perfectly obey everything. But there are points at the end of the book where Joshua will commend the people for actually going in and obeying all that he had commanded. So I tend to think that he genuinely believed them. But if I were him, I would have been thinking, we'll see. We'll see. But anyway, that's just an interesting thought. But did you catch one other thing before we come to the close of the second half of verse 18? Did you catch what they said to Joshua? Said, we're going to obey you. We're going to do everything that you commanded us. In verse 17, he says, only may the Lord your God be with you. The literal translation of this is only the Lord be with you, which almost hints at the suspicion that there might be moments where he's the only one walking in accordance to God's command. The people are rebelling, but he needs God to continue and to lead them on. Reminds me of the familiar refrain, though none go with me, still I'll follow. And yes, we must remain committed to God's leading and plan, even if others don't go with us or kick against the goads or do frustrating, dumb things. We need to realize that if God goes with us, that's enough. Because it means that we're going to be with him. And so this is their charge in kind of in an ironic way, perhaps even foreshadows, but it drills home this point that yes, the people must commit to follow, but also the Lord. The Lord is truly who and what we need. We close here. Well, actually, you know what? I got 5 more hours of content, so here we go. No, I'm just kidding. One other point I wanted to draw from this before I move to the second half of verse 18. This is more than just committing to follow. This is a commitment in unison. Let's look at the language here throughout this whole section. All that you've commanded, we will do. Wherever you send, we will go. We obeyed, we will obey. And they say, whoever goes against you, they're going to be put to death. This demonstrates a heart of unity. And one of the greatest forces against an effective advance in God's kingdom is disunity and discord. And we need to be mindful, as we're also encouraged in Ephesians 4, first few verses, is that unity is something that's already been purchased and afforded, but we have to maintain it. And as we commit to follow, and we trust God, and we do our part, and we walk together in unity, the Lord does amazing things, doesn't he? Maintain the unity. And this goes back, of course, to the passage in 1 Thessalonians, among other passages. We maintain unity by speaking love, the truth and love to each other. We maintain unity by caring for everybody's needs. We maintain unity by speaking kindly and by encouraging and by being patient and by being slow to speak and quick to listen. We maintain unity by not insisting on our own way. We maintain unity by deferring to others. We maintain unity by going out of our way to serve others. We maintain unity by putting other people first and their needs, their concerns first above our own. And this will be a continual growth, but what results from unity is peace. It's very hard to make any advances when there's dissension in the ranks we need to be unified, and we need to realize that it's on me, you individually, to see to it that I am walking in unity and selflessness. Selfishness, that will snuff out any flame in a moment, and it will just sap the joy out of the work. Maintain unity. The last part of verse 18. I think this is probably the most encouraging thing that Joshua heard. 3 times Joshua heard it directly from God. And now through the people, he hears it for a 4th time. He says, only be strong and courageous. I think God was trying to encourage him. I think God was trying to remind him, you can do this. I've got you. And boy, do we need to be people of encouragement to one another. As people step out, as people serve, as people endure, as people are fighting back temptation and sin in their life, they're not going to be perfect. But we need to be like the people here with Joshua, encouraging our brothers and sisters to be strong and courageous. And again, that word courage, courageous, means not flinching in the face of fear or adversity. Not the absence of fear. It's determining that your actions will not be swayed by the presence of fear. In fact, you have power to maneuver in whichever direction, even in the midst of it. That is what courage is, and that strength only comes from God, as Paul would say in Ephesians 6:10, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might.